You're telling me this housewife thinks she can outshoot my best operators? Lady, this isn't your Sunday church picnic. This is a Navy SEAL qualification course. The instructor's voice carried across the range with practiced authority, drawing snickers from the assembled operators. The woman at the edge of the group said nothing, her weathered hands methodically checking the ancient rifle she'd brought, a Vietnam-era M40 that looked older than half the men present. Master Chief Rodriguez watched her movements from his position near the command post, something nagging at the edge of his memory about the way she held that weapon. If you believe quiet competence beats loud arrogance every time, type respect below. The morning had started typically enough at Naval Special Warfare Group 1's Advanced Marksmanship Range in the California desert. The SEALs were 3 days into a critical sniper recertification that would determine operational readiness for an upcoming deployment. Morale had been steadily declining as operator after operator failed to achieve the required scores at extreme distance, 1,800 meters in shifting wind conditions that made the shots nearly impossible. The woman had appeared at dawn, a figure in faded civilian clothes carrying a battered rifle case, claiming she'd been sent by someone at JSOC to observe. The range instructor, Senior Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, had barely glanced at her paperwork before dismissing her to the observation area. But she'd quietly moved closer to the firing line, studying the failed attempts with an intensity that drew Sullivan's ire. When she'd softly mentioned that the operators were overcompensating for wind drift, he'd exploded. 20 years of training SEALs, and this woman who looked like she should be at a PDA meeting was trying to tell him about ballistics? The entire team had gathered to watch him dress her down, their own frustrations finding an outlet in mocking laughter as Sullivan suggested she try the shot herself if she was so knowledgeable. She accepted with a single nod, walking to the firing position with measured steps that never varied in length or pace. The SEALs arranged themselves in a semicircle behind her, some pulling out phones to record what they assumed would be spectacular failure. She lowered herself into a prone position with a fluidity that made Master Chief Rodriguez step forward from his post, his eyes narrowing as he watched her build her shooting platform without a single wasted movement. Her breathing pattern caught his attention next, the distinctive tactical breathing of someone who'd learned to shoot between heartbeats in situations where missing meant dying. She made minute adjustments to the rifle's ancient scope, her fingers working the turrets with a precision that came only from countless repetitions under pressure. Sullivan was still talking, making jokes about soccer moms and gun clubs, but Rodriguez noticed how the woman's awareness never wavered from her sight picture even as insults rained down around her. The wind flag showed 3 different directions at various distances, a nightmare scenario that had defeated every SEAL who'd attempted it. She waited, reading something in the mirage that others couldn't see. The first shot shattered the morning air with a distinctive crack that silenced Sullivan mid-sentence. Downrange, 1,800 meters through 3 different wind zones and a 15-degree temperature gradient. The steel target rang with a perfect center hit. Before anyone could speak, she was cycling the bolt with mechanical precision, adjusting 2 clicks right on her windage. The second shot followed 3 heartbeats later, another center hit. She fired 3 more times in rhythm, each shot painting a group that could be covered with a quarter. The ancient rifle spoke with authority that transcended its age, and when she finally sat back on her heels, the 5-shot group downrange was tighter than anything achieved with the unit's modern precision weapons. Sullivan's mouth worked soundlessly as he stared through the spotting scope, his face draining of color as he confirmed what seemed impossible. The woman safed her weapon and stood, her expression unchanged as she began breaking down the rifle with the same methodical precision she'd shown while shooting. Not a single SEAL spoke. The only sound was the distant ping of cooling steel and the whisper of wind through the desert scrub. Rodriguez was already at the command post, his fingers flying across the classified terminal as he pulled personnel records with his command access. The name she'd given, Sarah Chun, returned a file that made him physically step back from the screen. The redacted portions alone told a story, black bars covering operational history that required clearance levels he didn't possess despite his 25 years in special operations. What wasn't redacted made his hands shake slightly as he read. Army Special Operations, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Sniper Team Leader. Operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and 6 other countries whose names were blacked out. Credited kills. Classified, minimum 200 plus. The photograph in the file was 15 years younger, but unmistakably her, wearing the uniform of an operator so elite that most people in special operations didn't even know they existed. The decorations list scrolled for 3 pages: silver star with Valor device, bronze stars with 2 mini oak leaf clusters to count, a presidential unit citation that Rodriguez recognized as coming from an operation that was still classified above top secret. The final entry made him close his eyes in recognition. Medical retirement, 2018. Injuries sustained operation, redacted, where she'd spent 17 hours in an overwatch position with a shattered femur, providing cover fire that allowed an entire SEAL platoon to extract under heavy contact. Rodriguez printed the single page he was authorized to share and walked back to the range with measured steps, his mind processing what he'd discovered. The SEALs were still frozen in tableau around Chun, who was carefully cleaning her rifle with an old cotton cloth. Sullivan stood apart, his earlier arrogance replaced with something approaching shock as he continued to stare at the impossibly tight group downrange. Rodriguez handed him the paper without a word, watching the senior chief's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally something that looked like shame. The paper contained only her name, her final unit assignment, and a single line about her medical retirement, enough for anyone in special operations to understand they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Sullivan's voice cracked as he read the unit designation aloud, and 20 heads snapped toward Chun with new understanding. She continued cleaning her rifle, apparently oblivious to the shifting dynamic around her. Rodriguez cleared his throat and did something he'd done only a handful of times in his career. He came to attention and rendered a salute to someone in civilian clothes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the weight of profound respect. "Master Chief Rodriguez. I was with Charlie Platoon in Kamdesh when you were overhead. You saved 18 of my brothers that day." The revelation rippled through the gathered SEALs like an electric current. The Kamdesh operation was legend in the special operations community, a mission that went catastrophically wrong until a single sniper had turned the tide with shooting that shouldn't have been humanly possible. Every man present knew the story, had studied it in tactics classes, but none had known the identity of the shooter who'd been credited with 43 kills in 6 hours while providing overwatch for the trapped platoon. Chin finally looked up from her rifle, her eyes meeting Rodriguez's with the weight of shared experience. "You boys made it harder than it needed to be," she said quietly, the first real sentence she'd spoken since accepting Sullivan's challenge. "Kept trying to move too fast. Sometimes the mission requires patience." She stood slowly, favoring her left leg slightly, the one shattered in 2018, and addressed Sullivan directly. "Your operators are good shooters, Senior Chief, but they're fighting the wind instead of reading it. The mountain teaches different lessons than the range." Sullivan couldn't meet her eyes, his shame palpable as he remembered his mockery of this woman who'd forgotten more about combat marksmanship than he'd ever learn. One of the younger SEALs stepped forward, his voice tentative but eager. "Ma'am, could you show us what you're seeing out there?" Chun considered for a moment, then nodded once and moved back to the firing position, but this time as an instructor rather than a shooter. Her entire demeanor shifted subtly, still quiet, still economical with words, but now radiating a teaching authority that came from absolute mastery. She gathered the SEALs around her and began explaining the wind-reading methodology that had taken her 20 years to perfect, using terms some of them had never heard despite their advanced training. She spoke of reading mirage not just for wind but for temperature gradients, of using vegetation movement at various distances to build a 3-dimensional wind map, of feeling barometric pressure changes through your cheekbone on the stock. As she talked, she had different operators attempt shots, correcting their positions with tiny adjustments, a shifted elbow here, a modified breathing pattern there. Within an hour, success rates at extreme distance had jumped 40%. Sullivan stood at the edge of the group, his notebook out, frantically recording every word from this woman he'd dismissed as a housewife. When she mentioned a specific scope adjustment technique, he interrupted with a question, his tone now that of an eager student rather than an arrogant instructor. She answered patiently, without any reference to his earlier behavior. teaching as she'd been taught by the legends who'd come before her. The story spread through Naval Special Warfare Group 1 within hours, then jumped to Dam Neck, Fort Bragg, and every special operations compound in the inventory. The details grew with each telling, but the core remained unchanged. An unknown woman had appeared at a SEAL range, been mocked and dismissed, then demonstrated shooting that defied belief before being revealed as one of the most lethal snipers in American military history. Within a week, the video clips that some SEALs had started recording as jokes became training material, analyzed frame by frame for the subtle techniques she'd demonstrated. The range at Group 1 became known as Chin's Chapel, and her 5-shot group was preserved under plexiglass with a plaque that simply read, "Patience and Precision." SC Sullivan underwent his own transformation, seeking out every piece of training material about combat marksmanship he could find, ultimately becoming one of the Navy's most sought-after instructors because he'd learned to teach humility alongside tactics. He kept a photo on his desk, a screenshot from that day showing Chun in her shooting position, a reminder that expertise can come in unexpected packages. The SEALs who'd been present that day carried the lesson forward into their operational careers. Their shooting improved, but more importantly, their assumptions challenged. They told the story to every new operator who came through training, a parable about the danger of judgment and the power of quiet competence. Years later, the incident became part of official special operations folklore, taught at the JFK Special Warfare Center as a case study in expertise recognition and the importance of institutional humility. Chun herself disappeared back into civilian life, occasionally surfacing to consult for units preparing for specific deployments, always arriving without fanfare and leaving just as quietly. Those who encountered her in these rare appearances spoke of the same characteristics: minimal words, maximum impact, and a teaching style that transformed good shooters into exceptional ones. Rodriguez, who eventually became Command Master Chief of Naval Special Warfare, instituted what became known as the Chun Standard, a requirement that every SEAL sniper spend time training with unconventional instructors, particularly those whose appearance might challenge preconceptions. He would tell new operators about that morning in the desert, about the woman who looked like a suburban mother but shot like death itself, and about the danger of letting assumptions cloud judgment in a profession where expertise was often hidden beneath unassuming exteriors. The rifle she'd used that day, the battered M40 that had seemed so out of place among the modern weapons, was eventually donated to the SEAL Heritage Center with a simple inscription: "Accuracy is final." It became a pilgrimage site of sorts for military marksmen, a reminder that the weapon matters less than the warrior behind it. The legacy of that morning extended beyond marksmanship into the very culture of special operations. It became a touchstone story for addressing institutional arrogance, referenced in leadership courses and ethics discussions throughout the community. The phrase, "pulling a Sullivan," entered the lexicon as a warning against dismissing expertise based on superficial judgments, while Chun Quiet became the gold standard for professional confidence that needed no external validation. The impact reached into recruitment and retention policies, with special operations commands actively seeking unconventional candidates whose expertise might be overlooked by traditional metrics. Chin's influence could be traced through a generation of operators who learned to look beyond the obvious, to respect the quiet ones who observed from the edges, to understand that the most dangerous people in any room were often those who felt no need to prove it. Sullivan himself would go on to write the definitive manual on combat marksmanship, dedicating it to the teacher who appeared when the student was finally ready to learn. He never forgot the humiliation of that day, but transformed it into his greatest strength as an instructor, teaching his students that the moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop learning. The manual became required reading across special operations, its lessons extending far beyond shooting into leadership, humility, and the recognition of mastery in unexpected places. In the end, what started as a moment of mockery became a transformational event that reshaped how America's elite warriors thought about expertise, judgment, and the quiet professionals who moved through the world unnoticed until the moment their skills were needed. Chun had fired 5 shots that morning, but her impact was measured in the thousands of operators who learned to see past their assumptions, to respect the silence that often accompanied true competence, and to understand that legends don't always arrive wearing uniforms or carrying credentials. Sometimes they show up in faded clothes with ancient rifles and change everything with a whisper instead of a shout. For more stories where demonstrated expertise triumphs over superficial judgment and where silent competence defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.